This is a 4-minute introduction to the audio-described version of The Design and Influence of 66 Portland Place, a 10-minute narrative film where architectural historian Neal Shasore introduces and presents the architecture, influences, and innovations of the RIBA's 1930s headquarters building in London, designed by George Gray Warnham. Please note that there is minimal description throughout the film due to the voiceover. In this film, 66 Portland Place's complex history is explored by Neal Shasore, including a detailed look at its impressive art, craft, and materials. The building is designed primarily in the Swedish modernist style, blended with late neoclassical. These elements are highlighted in the bronze doors, architectural motifs, and multi-story main window. This is elaborated in more detail within the film. Neal Shasore is a tall, slim man around 6 feet tall and of mixed black African and Indian heritage. He's in his early 30s with short black curly hair and brown skin. He has stubble which covers his chin and upper lip, thick brows and brown eyes, which look directly at the camera lens while he narrates the film, containing both images and footage. Neal is smartly dressed in crisp black long-sleeved shirt under black jacket and black trousers that are turned up at the ankles and edge up to the shin when seated, revealing yellow socks in black desert boots and pulled up to meet the hem of his trousers. His shirt collar is loosely open, revealing a black polo neck beneath. As the film begins, the 6-story building of 66 Portland Place faces us on a diagonal, nestled on the corner of a busy crossroads in Marylebone. It is steel-framed with a Portland stone exterior, its edge centre screen, as the sides of the building jut slightly up to the left and right. Each side is adorned with rows of tiny windows, some graduating into tall, thin ones further down. Wrought iron railings line the base of the building. The wall to the left contains a central multi-panelled window spanning 2 floors, and below this, 2 vast rustic cast bronze doors bearing various sculpted figures and buildings. 2 white columns sit either side of this door, and bronze railing design sits above the overhead RIBA inscription, Royal Institute of British Architects. The word welcome in Barial, a more modern grey font, becomes apparent when we close in on the top of the pane. The image changes to Neal standing before this door, beginning the film's narrative, the number 66 now visible either side. As the film continues, the screen often splits into various video squares, each housing a different view, perspective, or section of the building's interior or exterior, alternating between modern-day footage, a black-and-white photograph, an artist's sketch, or a creased cartoon of the 9 white men, one a white-haired head with sprouting wings hovering above, the building team. Black and white images of various architects or characters involved in the history of the building also appear as Neal introduces them, usually heralded by the click sound of a camera. A monochrome silver-haired George Gray Warnham at a writing desk covered with blueprint, holding a fountain pen that hovers over the paper and a monocle which dangles from his right eye. A sepia-toned image of his wife Miriam appears in another video screen, coiffed black hair piled neatly close to her head. She is moving paintbrushes over the interior panels behind a table of paint pots. Black and white images of James Woodford, Bainbridge Copnell, and Harry Spearpoint follow after, to name but a few, wearing overalls or suits, flat caps, some bearing moustaches, and holding paintbrushes. Interwoven images throughout the film are displayed in close-up or wide camera angle, sometimes one square remaining on Neal, running in tandem with these images. Sometimes the screen splits into 2, displaying 2 different perspectives of Neal within the same room, often surveying old, bold, coloured designs from various architects or sectional cut-through diagrams. Neal takes us through the building, speaking to us from several rooms with varying visible backgrounds. In the entrance, he addresses us in front of a blurry pericut stone-lined wall split into 3 sections. The middle section is frosted glass, the others bearing the indistinct names of former RIBA presidents. The RIBA Library is on the 3rd floor of the building, with an internal gallery containing over 130,000 books and 850 periodicals, the majority housed in the original open-access curved bookcases, concealing radiators behind steel blue enamel. a photo and caricature drawing of a 1930s RIBA dinner in the Florence Hall, a table of well-dressed men and women sat, addressed by an unseen speaker. The Jarvis Hall, a fully equipped lecture theatre, a large projector screen, its focal point, visible before rows of red curved seating. Neal sits casually on the 4th floor of the building, perched on the wood-rimmed skirting of a wall within the Claw Learning Studio. His arms rest on his knees, hands together, fingers touching, as he speaks to us through the lens against a wall of stark white, the area beneath the skirting made of a recycled plastic made to look like marble. Gentle shadows are cast by Neal's seated frame, and images or sketches of the building, as he refers to them, are projected in a small square to his left. Bold white lettering against a black background reads 66 Portland Place, the RIBA logo beneath. RIBA in bold white lettering, reminiscent of Roman numerals, with a black and white image of 2 lithe lions either side of a thin tower with 3 tiny turrets, similar to a piece in a chessboard. Their tails curl upward and they each have a foot raised against the tower, an arm each resting on it. Beneath this, architecture.com. The screen fades and 66 Portland Place comes into view. Neal Shasore.
I'm here at 66 Portland Place, the headquarters of the Royal Institute of British Architects, known as the RIBA, designed in the 1930s by George Grey Wernham, alongside his wife Miriam Wernham, and a whole range of assistants, collaborators, artists, craftsmen, builders and other architects.
A faded cartoon of the building team.
This is a fascinating building, one of the exemplary buildings of the 1930s in all its decorative richness inside and out. But what makes it particularly interesting, I think, is that this is a building designed by architects for architects. It's a monument to professionalisation, for good or ill, built at a time when the modern profession of architecture was being forged. That coincidence makes it particularly rich and particularly worth reflecting on. It tells us a lot about how architects understood themselves, what they did and where they fit, and how they thought architecture could communicate their values and purpose to the wider public.
Neal slips through the bronze doors inside.
By the early 1930s, the RIBA had expanded significantly from what was a small metropolitan club founded a century earlier to an imperial institute. With its membership standing at around 6,000, it had outgrown its rather gentlemanly and club-like premises at 9 Conduit Street, where its swelling and rather valuable collections were being heated by coal fire and lit by candlelight. The move to Portland Place then was about space, but it was also about modernisation for 3 main purposes. To create a house of architecture, a public or semi-public institutional building, a place for the public to visit for talks, Members Club, a series of spaces for members to meet, to socialise and to politic, and a machine for administration. There was a growing, powerful executive, architectural mandarins, who actually did the work of running the bureaucracy, a kind of civil service for this Whitehall of professionals.
The view lingers above the book-lined shelves of the RIBA library, then scans the cases. Bold white lettering appears, influences, as Neal approaches a table of diagrams.
I'm in the library on the 3rd floor, reconceived as a modern information centre in the 1930s, and I want to show you 3 early projects by the architect of the building, George Grey Wernham. These drawings from the early part of his career tell us something really important about where he came from as a designer. Wernham was typical of his generation in that he was part trained as an apprentice and part trained in an architecture school. This first drawing, a domestic project for Seatown near Bridport in Dorset, has all the typical features of the arts and crafts. Low eaves in thatch with pretty dormers, a brick chimney and a rough cast face, painted green shutters, a little birdhouse, and in plan, asymmetrical, an L-shaped window seat overlooking the garden terrace and an inglenook fireplace. On the other hand, this is Wernham's study of the French town of Richelieu, designed by the architect Jacques Lemercier in the 17th century, an ideal town plan, axially planned, which Wernham studied on a trip abroad funded by a prize at the AA, and including his neat, measured drawings of the elevations round the central squares. And then finally, I want to show you some mock-ups of a decorative scheme for the Derby Dance Hall, which Wernham refitted, collaborating with the artist Walpole Champneys, to create these riotous, intensely decorative, carnivalesque interiors using imagined scenes of 18th century conviviality. But Wernham was also interested in modern developments, and there are a number of influences at play on his practice and indeed the design of this building. There's much of Ragnar Osterberg's City Hall and echoes of Gunnar Asplund's Stadsbibliotek, the city library, but I see a much closer link to Ivar Tengbom's Konserthuset, or concert hall. The rhythm of the fenestration on the main facade is remarkably similar to that of the Weymouth Street facade of 66 Portland Place. There's also an American accent. Married to a wealthy San Franciscan heiress, Miriam Gersel, an artist and painter in her own right, he was exposed to North American jazz moderne architecture. There's a very good chance that the San Francisco Pacific Exchange was a strong influence on Portland Place.
The view moves past rows of windows between pillars of carved paraquet stone, then cuts to the Jarvis Hall. White lettering, space.
I want to think now about how the building was planned, how Wernham handled space, solids and voids, mass and volume, transparency and opacity. Wernham's competition design was broadly similar in compositional mode to the building as eventually built. The height of the competition design was reduced to, additional stories for lettable office accommodation were eventually omitted, and on a smaller footprint it was decided to retain neighbouring 68 Portland Place. Wernham used a steel frame, by this time a standard construction method, which essentially generated a grid to guide the design. You can see how this determines the rhythm of the principal bays in this section or cut-through of the building. Quote, "Architect and structural engineers have worked with a degree of harmony and mutual understanding that is unusual," the RIBA Journal recorded. The building is organised around a large central void which accommodated a triple height staircase and the bulk of two substantial public spaces. Then around these were organised smaller compartments, prestige offices and committee rooms to the front, and other offices and lounges, more private spaces down the quieter side road of Weymouth Street. This clear tectonic fit all the volumes within a cube, spaces slot together like a tower at the start of a game of Jenga. Let's look briefly at the differing functions of the building. The ground floor was for institute business, essentially offices for senior staff, a general office for clerks, and a soundproofed typist's office with an illuminated notice board. The first floor and the mezzanine on the way down to the basement were the principal public rooms, the Henry Jarvis Hall, the main auditorium and lecture theatre, and on the first floor, the Henry Florence Memorial Hall. The Florence Hall was both a meeting room, a banqueting hall, an exhibition gallery, and an examination hall. The second floor was for the membership. There were dozens of committees for members that comprised the machinery of the Institute, setting policy and guidance, getting a grip on the evolving aspects of professional practice and design. They needed places to meet, and 3 committee rooms lined the Portland Place facade. The North and South committee rooms sandwiched the much more grandly decorated near double-height Aston Webb committee room, with kid leather panels and a green lino-top table brought over from Conduit Street and reconditioned. The principal meeting room served as the heart of the building, but the library was the brain, the information centre of the profession. The most modern and up-to-date equipment and methods of information gathering were used. The library produced the journal and was closely connected to the public relations function, which had neighbouring offices. And then at the crown, or summit, was the council chamber, much like a papal conclave, with scarlet leather upholstery and rich walnut veneers lining the walls.
The view snakes round the sparkling pews of the chamber. Bronze screen doors separate, focusing briefly on the glowing brass handlebars, 2 lions. White letters read craft and making.
Luxuriating in materials is completely characteristic of Wernham's interior. This is a building so much about fine craftsmanship and ornament. This was a building trying to say something about the nature of architecture and indeed the nature of architectural meaning. The plaster relief plaques on the ceiling of the Florence Hall show the various workers engaged on the project. Jan Uter etching glass, the carpenter, the bricklayer, the plumber, and oddly, the sculptor in the guise of an electrician having a light bulb moment. These all reflect the building processes used in the construction and decoration of the building. Wernham and his contemporaries believed in the supremacy of the architect, but valued their collaborators in the craftspeople and contractors they worked with. They tried to fulfill what has been called a medieval modern ideal, all working together to create a kind of cathedral of the crafts, integrated, holistic, collaborative. On the jamb and soffit of the double height opening accommodating the staircase to the upper levels, we see this too in the rough gilded lab, a 1930s thick gesso or stucco, exalting the tools of construction, from concrete mixers, drills and rivet guns for the foundations and structure, to electrical wiring and plastering, through to the furnishing trades expressed through paint and brushes for decoration right at the top. And we see this on the outside as well. Along Weymouth Street, the architect, in the guise of Sir Christopher Wren, alongside the sculptor, the painter, the artisan and the mechanic. This was a celebration, in other words, of the production of architecture, of the collaboration of the trades, the arts and the profession. 66 Portland Place was a temple not just to the professionalisation of architecture, but also to the art of building. On an exceptionally tight site, client and architect created an intensely packed, rational programme for a profession and its bureaucracy seeking to remake the profession for a democratic age. But more than that, it was a building whose designers, makers, builders and users reflected self-consciously on what architecture meant. It positioned architecture and the architect, yes, at the centre of things, but at the centre of a much wider world of making and craft. That might be a lesson worth heeding for the profession that occupies these spaces today.
Bold white lettering against a dark grey background reads, "The story of 66 Portland Place continues online, where we explore its connection to the British Empire. You can also visit the building or use the library. Find out more on architecture.com, RIBA and the RIBA logo. With thanks to Neal Shasore, Architectural Press Archive /RIBA Collections, Jack Banting, the Warnham family, and the Claude Duffield Foundation, whose grant made this film possible. Audio description by Kate Taylor-Davis for Vocalise.